I want to talk Detroit sports. Now, it'd be easy to talk Detroit Lions with you. I'm 50 years old. I'm actually a few months older than you, so we know all the stories. We'll touch on the Lions a little bit, but I noticed you're wearing a Tigers hat.
Yeah.
And you and I talked to Little Tigers back in February when you were working the morning show, and I'm a big believer in El Vila.
Okay.
And there ain't many people that believe in El Vila. Now, I remember we had this conversation in February, and I said to you, Sean, obviously before the pandemic, if the Tigers, can you at least give you've been critical of El Vila, and rightfully so. I mean, whoever has is rightfully so. But I said to you in February, how about in July or August, if some of the young kids start coming up and you start seeing a little promise, will you give him a little bit of slack? Well, it's funny, we're in July, just about August, and they just played their second game.
Yeah.
What about the news you've been reading about and hearing about these young kids, even though they haven't played? Does it seem a little different than the conversation we had in February?
You know what? I'm a guy, and as a Lion fan, we've been jaded. Seeing is believing, and I think, like, you go back to the winter time, and so many hope springs eternal, and it was that type of thing. What I always remind people, and I still remind people, is take a look at so many of these quote unquote names of the future and see how they did last year. It's a big dose of hope. And I worry about Al in this regard. I don't like the signings he made when he could spend money. I don't like the trades he made, especially the return. And I don't know how much credit we give a guy for getting a couple of no-brainer picks. Now, let's look at the whole picture, though. If some of those other guys that they pick come to fruition, we have to revisit that conversation. There's no doubt about it. But Al, to me, has been on the job, for what?
5 years.
Almost 5 years now. And it's like, okay, and unfortunately what happens, and I'm not pointing my finger at you, because I remember we had this conversation. People said, well, you have to remember what he took over. He didn't have a chance to spend. And I said, well, no, that's not true. He gave the money to Jordan Zimmerman. He gave the money to Pelfrey. He gave the money to Lowe. He gave the money to Upton. So now, did we know that it would eventually become, a mandate where they had to pare down salary? No. So in fairness to him, I can't hold him to that. But just so far on the job, there isn't. I think people are working under more hope than what has actually happened. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and many people will tell you hope's not a strategy, right? So
I love that quote.
Yeah.
The Jim Schwartz line.
Yeah.
That's just redeeming. Other than I'm not afraid, and maybe the flag on Thanksgiving, my redeeming thought about Jim Schwartz is hope's not a strategy.
You just brought up Jim Schwartz. I'm thinking, oh boy, we're gonna have another hour interview
We're gonna
here.
go right down the road.
In fairness to that February conversation, I called in because you were talking about Bob Quinn.
Yes.
And I, to me, is like Bob Quinn's been here 5 years as well too, and Al Avila's been here 5 years, and we'll get to Bob Quinn later in the Lions, and Bob Quinn was just named the worst GM in
I know,
the NFL.
I saw that.
But I think Al Avila, the reason why I think he deserves more credit is because he's been here 5 years. Not that he just trying to rebuild the Detroit Tigers. He's got to rebuild AAA, AA, single A.
Sure.
And there's a lot more involved. And to me, I don't know if you think I'm wrong, but when 2016 came, the Tigers were old. They were slow. Excuse me.
Agree with you 100%.
There was a lot to rebuild there. And fairness, the trades that Dave Dabrowski made at the end, whether he walked out the door or he was fired out the door, he didn't get great returns as well.
No.
Jacoby Jones, Matthew Boyd and Daniel Norris for David Price. We haven't got much.
No.
I mean, Matthew Boyd's he's been good, but I think Al Avila was handed a lot worse situation than Bob Quinn was handed.
I think, what's interesting, and you talk about 2016, I don't know if you remember this, and our mutual friend who I was working with at the time at 105.1, we went back and forth constantly that year about the Tigers. And they were done. Yeah. Like, nobody wanted to see it. Nobody wanted to see it. I thought they had a manager that was in over his head. Oh. Don't get me started on that. But if you remember, they kind of got hot later that year and nearly made the playoffs. And I remember having a conversation, and I said, A, they're not going to make the playoffs, and B, this is fool's gold. And I think we kind of found out, we can look back 4 years later and say that it was fool's gold. my concern is I'm the type of person, and this is what, at the time I would talk about with Bob. Give me something that you do to make me believe in you. I want to give you my heart. I want to give you my heart, but Al's signings haven't been good. The trades haven't been good. He did have to replenish the system, but in my mind, Fredi, I think there's a difference between getting bodies in there and getting real players in there. And that's why I can't bag on him for that right now, because I don't think it's fair to assign a pass or fail grade right now for a system that he had to rebuild. Yeah, I don't think that's fair. I can't look at this guy and go, he's a bust and he's a bust. This is more of a wait and see. But I think therein comes the frustration, because some people are saying, well, you've been on the job for 5 years.
Yeah.
Like, what? So now we're going to have to wait another 2 or 3 years to come see if this group of kids come to fruition, you know?
And when I spoke to you in February, my thinking was July, August, maybe a Casey Mize comes in and turns his town into Mike Friedrich in 1976.
Oh, it'd be great.
You know?
Oh, I remember it. We're old enough to remember it, yeah.
This town could really use it.
Oh, do we need it now?
And it's funny you bring up Brad Osmus. Many people don't remember, and I don't know why I feel like I'm the only one that remembers this, but Dave Dabrowski only interviewed 2 guys, Brad Osmus, and he interviewed the guy from the Philadelphia Phillies that took him to the World Series. He was with the Cleveland Indians, Charlie.
I can't think
the old guy.
Yeah.
He won the World Series.
Yeah.
He interviewed him, and he hired Brad Osmus. And do you remember on Mother's Day, I want to say 2015, maybe it was 2016, but I want to say it was 15, Mother's Day. They were in Baltimore, and J.D. Martinez gets a ball versus a called third strike, and it was a strike.
Yeah.
And they were talking about he was going to be fired the next day.
I remember that.
If they would have came home with that
Totally.
loss.
Yeah, totally.
Things might have been different if he would have got fired then.
Yeah.
Who knows, you know?
It
tailspin after that.
People didn't, I go back to what we were talking about. People didn't want to admit it. People didn't want to, it was over. It was a fun run. I don't care what anybody says. The run didn't come with a World Series. And I joke all that, Fredi, we had our payoff. You and I had 1984. I'll never forget it. I mean, it was just a magical time. Well, you have, my son, for example, 20 years old, baseball-loving kid. That's his thing. We had season tickets for so many years. He's never had his payoff. I want the payoff for him.
I know.
I want the payoff for, the generation after us that didn't see it. I don't care what anybody says. So many people have looked at it as a pass or fail proposition. The memories from 2006 to 2014 for me were awesome. Yeah. There were so many great memories. And yes, it stinks. There's no doubt about it that there were no championships in that, okay? How do you deny so many of those moments? It was great to see baseball back and having a young son and going to all those games. It was so much fun. But I think people, to your point, people wanted to believe that the ride wasn't over, and the ride had really ended 2 years previously.
Yeah. Charlie Manuel was the name.
Yeah, Manuel, thank you.
And two, we talk about 84. I hate to say it, but every time we turn on the TV and watch a Detroit Tigers game, it's all Jack Morris is sitting there, Gibby's sitting there, Dan Petrie's sitting there. It's like, God, 84, I mean, you're telling me we haven't won a World Series since 1984? And listen, I know if the Lions win the Super Bowl in this town, what will happen?
Oh.
But I really think the Detroit Tigers, and it really could own this town.
Oh,
Tigers and Lions, listen, Lions would be the first time winning a Super Bowl. I get it. But the Tigers and Lions, to me, are
I don't think there's any debate. Fredi, it's funny you mentioned 84, because when I was a kid, and I told this to a couple guys from the 68 team, I hated hearing about 1968.
Yeah.
I hated it.
Yeah.
All I heard was I knew more about that team. I wasn't alive, and I knew more about that team than I should. So when 84 happened, that was my 68. That was my way of saying, okay, now I can throw 84 in your face. These kids today, they're the same. They're tired of hearing about 84.
Yeah.
And that's no diss to Jack or Peaches or Gibby or any of those guys. They want and they need their 1984. So it's funny that you say that, because that's a conversation. My son will roll his eyes whenever they start waxing poetically about, here we go again, So and that's the way I felt about 68.
Yeah. So we talked about WDFN.
Yeah.
I'll admit it. I never listened to WDFN. I didn't get into sports radio probably until 2004, maybe 2006, right around that time. So I never had the pleasure of listening to WDFN, but obviously you were there right when it started, right?
No, I started, when it started, I was still in school, And I remember
College, you mean?
Yeah, I remember driving to school and just thinking, my gosh, this is the greatest thing on earth. And honestly, there were times where I would stay in my car because there was a good subject, and I ended up walking in late and everything. So I didn't start. Greg Henson was the program director at the time. I was at opening day 1999 for the Tigers.
Oh.
And I was doing two jobs. I was doing my job in
Man,
Toledo.
they were terrible in 99.
Yeah, I was doing my job in Toledo, and I was doing weekends at JR. And Greg just walked up to me. I'd never met Greg in my life. And Greg walked up to me. He was like, "Hey, are you the kid that's on JR on the weekends?" And I said, "Yeah." And he goes, "Do you want to come work at the Fan?" And we'll talk about it. And Greg was as blunt as a pickaxe. And just a couple of months later, I started there. And I'll always be forever grateful to Greg for that. That's something that, and I've told Greg that. And Greg, if you see this, I'll say it to you again. I'll always be forever grateful to Greg for that, because it was my opportunity to have a full-time gig in Detroit. I mean, it was fun working at JR at the time. I was part-time, and I had my own show in Toledo, and I was doing Toledo football and basketball at the time. But to come here full-time was awesome. And to work at the Fan, and I felt like such a fanboy when I got there, because I'd listened to Stoney and Wojo for years, and Parker and the Man were there at the time, and Terry Foster.
And you grew. You grew up here. Detroit.
Yeah.
Detroit Lions, Tigers, Pistons.
That's
Fan,
exactly it.
Just coming off the Bad Boys. The Pistons were really good.
Fredi, honestly, I felt like a fanboy. I did. And I had to contain it when I was there, and I started doing a show with Eric Pate, and we did a show for a year, and then shortly thereafter, they decided to make a decision, and Brandon Tierney went on to a lot of success, BT, and I got the midday show, and I was there, 7 years.
Really?
That lineup, it's so, in so many ways, Fredi, that seems like 100 years ago, but it seems like 2 weeks ago, because it was a long time where we were all together, and we had a lot of fun and a lot of success and everything, but all good things must come to an end.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna take. Instead of going back to all the time, the great times there. What was your thoughts when it ended? Terry Foster I saw on Twitter, it actually ended 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Versus 3 weeks ago, whatever it was, as we're filming right now. What were your thoughts when it was just?
Well, it kind of came down in waves. There was the when 1270 decided to switch to FM, we begged our bosses. We begged them, please let us move to FM.
What was that 97.1 before? Was it? Do you know? Was it a music
station?
It was
more like kind of an FM talk thing, if I'm not mistaken.
Right.
Like, wasn't it like Dominski and Doyle and stuff like that?
I don't know.
Yeah, it's so long ago now, but we begged them. And when I say we begged them, pretty much everybody at the station, we begged our management, and they basically said no. And we've had success against them. They've tried everything. We'll continue to have success. And we knew that we were dead. We knew it. And 2 years later, it eventually happened. It's funny because I'm, and if you want to say that I'm taking it personally, you can go right ahead. I think the people that say that it died in 2009, I adamantly disagree, because we had a run for 2 years after that where Killer and I worked together.
Okay.
And we had some success. We were never going to have the success that we had in the mid-aughts and everything. But we had more success than we did at the end of the first incarnation, and I would defy anybody to disagree with that. But you knew you were never going to win, and that was the difference.
Yeah, and to be fair, I was paraphrasing Terry
No,
Foster.
that's not for you.
I know. I might have.
Oh, I've heard a few people.
10 years, maybe he said 6 years or something like that.
I've heard a few people say, well, it really died in 2009. I disagree with that, and I think the ratings would show that. Yeah. But like I said, the difference is we were never going to win. Yeah. We knew when they brought me back, and they brought Shep back, and they brought Killer on, and they brought Ermani on. We knew we were never going to win. So in that regard, you could say that it had been dead, but we weren't getting the 1.1 ratings and everything. I promised myself a long time ago I'd never talk about ratings publicly, and I never will. But we weren't in the crap house. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
We weren't. It was fun, but it got to the point it was time to go. It was just mentally for me, it was time to go.
If you or your family is touched by autism, learn more about Fredi's foundation at #PopTheTap at FrediThePizzaMan.com. That's FREDI, thepizzaman.com, or email FrediThePizzaman@gmail.com.